Jungkook pulled up in a cab outside Taeyoung's parents' house. "Good morning, where are your suitcases?" said Jungkook, surprised as he got out of the cab and looked at Taeyoung, who was standing across from him in his home clothes. They had flown to Korea a few days ago and were scheduled to fly back to London together in 1.5 hours, where they attend the same university. "Not good," Taeyoung replied dryly, looking directly into Jungkook's eyes. "We have to break up." There was a resignation and coldness in his voice that hurt Jungkook's heart acutely. "Not a good joke, not funny at all." "I'm not joking." Jungkook began to blink frequently, looking at Taeyoung with his eyes wide open, clenching his fists to the point of pain. "I don't understand anything, Taeyoung. I love you. Why do you say that?" His voice trembled. "I had a long talk with my parents. I have to meet my father's business partner's daughter for the engagement. I have to, Jungkook. I have no choice." Jungkook picks up the hesitation in Taeyoung's voice for the first time. The abrupt sound of the car horn startled them. Jungkook had forgotten that there was a cab waiting for him a few feet away from them. "It's time for you to go," Taeyoung said in an almost whisper. "I can't live without you, please think again," said Jungkook, lowering his head to avoid showing his tears. "My feelings are my responsibility," Taeyoung replied with feigned calmness. "Jungkook, gather up the rest of your pride and leave with dignity," Taeyoung said. He then abruptly turned away and walked in the direction of the house, not to watch his beloved suffer anymore. He was afraid of changing his mind. Taeyoung turned around at the door when he heard the sound of a car engine moving away from him. His love had left him, and would soon be on the other side of the world. At his parents' house, preparations had begun for a dinner party for which his father's business partners and their families were expected to attend. Taeyoung looked devastated and lifeless, as if all his warmth and heart had left him along with Jungkook. He turned off his phone and put it in the nightstand beside his bed so as not to tempt himself. Toward evening, Taeyoung went down to the first floor to get a drink of water. He opened the refrigerator and got a bottle of water. There were many people around him, and there was a strange uneasiness in the air. The butler and the cook were wailing loudly about some kind of plane crash. Taeyoung turned toward the television that hung on the wall in the kitchen. "Breaking news. A plane disappeared from radar in an area of the mountains in Central Asia, between China, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. Rescuers from nearby countries have already flown to the site to search for survivors." Taeyoung was numb with fear and couldn't think because of the rush of blood to his ears. He took a deep breath. Taeyoung hoped, against all odds, that this was not his flight. He ran like a bullet to his room, opened his backpack, and pulled out his plane ticket. He feels his vision blur with tears, but he concentrates his gaze on the ticket with all his might. His fingers feel cold, but Taeyoung double-checks the flight number over and over again. "This can't be it." "No, no," whispers Taeyoung. He collapses to the floor in desperation. He hugs his knees and silently begins crying profusely. His shoulders shake and he starts to catch his breath. In an instant, all the problems have become so insignificant. Taeyoung forces himself to breathe again and stand up. He decides that he must act. Like a ghost, he pulls his phone out of the nightstand, turns it on, and sees missed calls from Jungkook, who called him over an hour ago. The approximate time the plane went off the radar. The realization came with a huge, unbearable sense of guilt that clutched at his throat. Jungkook had called him from the falling plane, and he hadn't picked up his call. The memory of their last conversation brought horror and a terrible self-loathing. Finally gathering the remnants of his will, he dialed the number of an old friend. "Jimin, hello?" Taeyoung's voice sounded colorless and ghostly. "Taeyoung, God, what happened to your voice? I didn't recognize you." "Hi," Jimin replied cheerfully. "Are you still in the volunteer club? Did you hear about the plane crash today?" "Yes, in the club. We're just flying out to the scene of the accident. The mountainous terrain is our element." "Why, do you want to go back to the climbing club?" replied Jimin with surprise. "Can you get me on your volunteer team today? Please, it's not that easy. The lists are formed. We fly out in." Before Jimin could finish, he heard a desperate sob on the other end that sent shivers down his spine. He had never seen Taeyoung cry before. "Let's give it a try. Get to the club quickly with the paperwork. You have 40 minutes, Jimin said in a confident tone. Taeyoung left the house unannounced. They were quickly assembled, flying in a small plane of a volunteer organization, which also provided them with protective clothing. The guys from the club had been involved in emergency response for many years, and Taeyoung had worked with many of them in the mountaineering club before. Jimin reported that an international rescue team had found the crash site at the foot of the mountain, and that they had found so many surviving passengers in the mountains. After his words, there was a buzz of applause and shouts of joy on the volunteer plane. The guys were happy and had a positive attitude. They flew to the base and received information about the 12 missing people, among whom was Jungkook. The volunteers learned that the passenger plane had made an emergency landing in the mountains due to engine trouble. The plane had split into several parts during a hard landing, but somehow miraculously escaped fire. So far, only one death was confirmed as a result of a heart attack by an elderly passenger. The remaining passengers in varying degrees of injury were disembarked to San Aviation. It was snowing lightly and sparsely. Taeyoung joined the search team for survivors led by Kim Namjoon, and they began to climb the mountain. Namjoon's team scoured the mountainside and exchanged information with other teams, where they happily reported on the people they had found. Suddenly, Namjoon received word from the base that a snowstorm was coming. The weather began to turn bad and the helicopter search from the sky was halted. Other members of the search team had long since left for another team to help get the found men down the mountain. We'll check the area, send the data to the base. We'll have to suspend the search afterwards because of the storm, Namjoon said in a commanding voice. There are 3 people left on the list. At dawn we can resume the search. Hopefully they are alive and will survive the storm, said Jin thoughtfully. I'm not going back to base, Taeyong said confidently. Namjoon and Jin looked around in shock at the newcomer to the team. Taeyong moved away from them to continue his search on his own. But immediately the team leader appears beside him, placing his strong hands on his shoulder. My orders are not negotiable, Namjoon says calmly, but after more gently and sympathetically he added, the lives of the volunteers and rescuers now come first. We can't take any chances. Visibility is getting worse and now the 3 of us have to go down to the base. You don't understand. I really need to keep looking, almost shouted Taeyong. He began to panic. The hope he had clung to with all his might began to melt away before his eyes. I don't care what happens to me. I have to go on. His voice trembled. He shook his head as if he wanted to wake up from a nightmare. Jin, he's hysterical. We have to sedate him. But we need him to be able to stand on his own feet and walk, Namjoon said with a sigh. Just a minute. Namjoon held Taeyong tightly by the waist, and Jin injected a sedative, after which Taeyong's body went limp. Taeyong could feel the salty taste on his lips and the tears streaming down his face. There was no more strength, no more meaning to life. Taeyong watched devastated as large snowflakes fell from the sky, as he was held tightly by Namjoon and Jin on both sides and dragged toward the base. Suddenly, with a gust of wind, he heard the painfully familiar and sweet voice of Jungkook sing. I love only you. Taeyong began to think he had lost his mind. I can forgive everything. Or maybe he was hallucinating because of the stress? Taeyong didn't understand anything. And harder to love you. Jungkook's voice sounded almost real and abruptly disappeared. Taeyong gathered all his strength and wrenched himself out of the guy's arms and ran toward the voice. He screamed desperately. Where are you? Where are you? Should I catch him? Asked Jin to the team leader. Let him do whatever he has to do. Let's go after him so he'll be safe, Namjoon said calmly. Suddenly Namjoon and Jin saw Taeyong suddenly disappear from sight. They ran up to where Taeyong had disappeared and saw that he had fallen into a ravine. Below was the wreckage from an airplane that clearly served as a shelter from the cold, with an orange piece of cloth tied to the corner of it. Taeyong was unconscious from the fall. There were clearly people under the wreckage of the plane. The volunteer is unconscious. There are still presumably survivors. Over. Requesting backup. Coordinates. Taeyong heard voices blurred and distant. Snow was pounding in his face, and the sky seemed so dark and heavy, as if it were his burden of guilt to Jungkook, to his parents, to the world. Taeyong woke up in the volunteer base. You're just a miracle. Namjoon would certainly disagree with me. You gave them a hard time, but thanks to you 3 more survived, said Jimin cheerfully and smiling broadly. Where are they? Asked Taeyong in a whisper. They were taken to London. They are in the hospital. There the guy gave first aid to the woman and a teenager. The 3 of them ended up in a ravine. He dragged them under a shelter he'd made himself, and threw brightly colored things on top so they could be found. He was very clever in general, said Jimin, admiringly. Taeyong always knew that Jungkook was a wonderful person. He was glad that he was okay. A few hours later, Taeyong and the other volunteers were on their way back to Korea. He didn't want to go to his parents' house, but he still had a lot of personal belongings there, especially the belt and jacket that Jungkook had given him. The butler opened the door and was surprised at how awful Taeyong looked. He looked like a zombie. Don't tell anyone I came, Taeyong said quietly. The butler nodded understandingly at him. Taeyong quickly went up to his temporary room to pack his suitcase. He quietly and silently made his way downstairs with his belongings. When he almost reached the door, he heard his father's indignant voice. Taeyong, how dare you leave dinner and disappear for days? Do you have any idea what kind of embarrassment your mother and I are in? Yelled his father indignantly. For once in your life, for once, can you ask me how I'm doing? Ask me if I'm okay? Answered Taeyong, with an ache in his heart. I understand now why Yoongi ran away from home at the age of 17. Don't you dare say his name in this house, shouted his father. He is your eldest son, after all. How can you give up your children so easily? I spent my whole life trying to prove to you and Mom that I deserved your love. After Yoongi left, I had to put even more effort into my efforts. Why can't you just love us? Do you only care about your status, money, and inheritance? What about us? Said Taeyong in a raised tone. What more outrage? How dare you talk to your father like that? Are you going to say you disown your son again? Whispered Taeyong with a smirk and sadness. I disown you myself? I have no parents now. He slammed the door and quickly got into a cab that took him to the airport. Taeyong felt nothing. It was as if he had burned out like a light bulb from the strain. Taeyong walked into his apartment in London. When he left this apartment, he did not even imagine how many trials he would have to endure. The only thing he wanted to do was to see and apologize to Jungkook. But at the same time, he decided he didn't deserve it. Taeyong lay down in his clothes on the bed and covered himself with a blanket, as if he were sinking into the depths of an ocean of guilt. Hey Jungkook, wait, you know Taeyong, right? Hoseok asked him excitedly. Hoseok was the head of Taeyong's group at the university. Hi, Did something happen? Jungkook's expression grew anxious. Taeyoung hasn't come to class in weeks. He's also not answering his phone, his emails, or his social media messages. He could be expelled from the university. The guys went to his house, but no one opened the door, Hoseok said. I'm not sure, but I'll try to contact his brother. Thanks, Jungkook. Jungkook met Yoongi at a concert a year ago, where he went at Taeyoung's invitation. He knew that Yoongi only kept in touch with Taeyoung, and that the brothers had a very warm relationship. He found Yoongi's number among his contacts, and sighed in relief. Yoongi, hi, it's Jungkook. Hi. They told me at the university that Taeyoung is missing. Have you been in contact with him? That was a long time ago. Have you? Answered Yoongi anxiously. He and I broke up in Korea. We didn't communicate after that. Jungkook said sadly. I'm sorry, I'll call my parents. If you get any information, will you call me? Okay, thanks. Jungkook replied with relief. Jungkook pulled out a spare key to Taeyoung's apartment from his secret pocket in his purse. He hesitated to check his apartment for hours. But still, the anxiety was too much and he decided to go to his house. Jungkook first knocked on the door, but no one opened it. Then he entered the apartment with the key Taeyoung had once given him. The house was dark and stuffy. There were bags, various empty food, packages, and bottles lying on the floor in some places. Jungkook walked into the bedroom and saw Taeyoung lying with his back to him. Taeyoung? Taeyoung? Whispered Jungkook. You're so handsome, Jungkook. I'm dreaming again, replied Taeyoung very quietly with a glassy gaze. Jungkook immediately realized that Taeyoung was not himself, and in a very bad condition. He looked very pale and lost weight. Jungkook called an ambulance, and then Yoongi. Taeyoung opened his eyes and looked around. You look like shit, said Yoongi in his manner. Am I in the hospital? Asked Taeyoung quietly in surprise. How did I get here? You don't remember? You were exhausted and dehydrated. By the way, it's about time. Yoongi looked at his watch. You almost missed the surprise, he said with a smile. Afterward, Yoongi wheeled the wheelchair over to the bed and said, Sit down here, Taeyoung. Oh no, I won't. You want me to carry you on my back? Said Yoongi with a smirk and rubbed Taeyoung's hair. Not again. Okay, I'll sit, Taeyoung replied with faux indignation. Yoongi was driving Taeyoung down the hospital corridor, which was flooded with bright sunlight. Suddenly, Taeyoung heard music. It grew louder and louder. Yoongi rolled him into a small concert hall inside the hospital. Taeyoung was about to say he wanted to go back to his room, but suddenly he heard a familiar tune. He turned to the stage and saw the man he loved most. Jungkook smiled and started singing Big Bangs. If you. Taeyoung couldn't bring himself not to look at him. Jungkook looked him in the eye and sang, Will the pain subside when time has passed? I think of old times and think of you. If it's not too late, can we be together again? If it's as hard for you as it is for me, could we make it easier? I cherish you more than I did then. After the song ended, people started applauding. Jungkook came down from the stage and walked over to Taeyoung and Yoongi. He sat down on a chair across from them so that he was at the same level as Taeyoung. Hi, said Jungkook uncertainly. Hi, replied Taeyoung quietly. It seems like his heart is about to stop with excitement. Thank you for saving my life, said Jungkook with a sincere smile. I know. How? Asked Taeyoung in surprise. When I brought you here, I met Jean, remember him? He's a doctor at this hospital and a volunteer. How small the world is. I'm sorry for everything. I forgave you long ago. Jungkook hugged Taeyoung and added in a whisper, It's more important now that you forgive yourself. I can't. You almost died. He lets go of his head, dropping tears on his pants. Taeyoung is in pain and Jungkook feels it. It's not your fault, Jungkook says in a confident tone. Taeyoung? Taeyoung looked up at Jungkook. His face was calm and serious, but there were tears traitorously flowing down his cheeks. It's not your fault, Jungkook repeats again as if he's putting a stop to this situation. Taeyoung is not crying from guilt now, but from a sense of release, as if he has been given a full breath of air. He feels alive again. That night in the mountains, when the storm started, I lost hope of meeting the dawn. The only thing I regretted back then was that I gave up easily and didn't fight for you. I began to sing out of desperation, Jungkook said in a half-whisper, and you found me. I'm sorry I was too late to find that out. Jungkook shook his head regretfully. They looked at each other in silence, as if no one was around. Do you still love me? Embarrassedly asked Jungkook first. He was afraid to hear the answer. More than life, answered Taeyoung confidently. He took Jungkook's hands in his palms and held them tightly, thinking that he would never give up on him again in his life. I love you too. If it's not too late. Can we be together again? Taeyoung repeated the words from song. Life has given us a second chance. Now I intend to be happy with you, and I plan to make you happy too. Jungkook smiled sincerely. I'm sorry to interrupt your romantic dialogue from the pink pony world, Yoongi said with a smile, raising one eyebrow. But now that you're reconciled and in front of me, I want to tell you something right away. Taeyoung and Jungkook looked at Yoongi in surprise and silence. They really seemed to have forgotten that he was standing next to them. I called my parents when Taeyoung went missing, talked to them for 2 whole hours. To recap, they want us to visit them for Mom's birthday in the summer. Taeyoung was shocked, knowing that Yoongi hadn't spoken to his parents in years. But I made them a condition that we come with Taeyoung's boyfriend, said Yoongi. What? Yelled Taeyoung and Jungkook at the same time. Dad said he'd look forward to seeing us, a self-satisfied Yoongi said. That's crazy, whispered Taeyoung, not believing his ears. Afterwards, he gently placed his palm on Jungkook's cheekbone and asked, "Do you agree?" "Yes." Jungkook's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," said Yoongi with a loud laugh, running away from the slipper Taeyoon had intended to throw at him. Taeyoon felt happy to be surrounded again by people he loves dearly.